I told Matthew it's been a long time since we've actually sung that song, and we hear sometime at funeral services, but appreciate that. Man, that's a land where we'll never grow old. I'm looking for that, aren't you? And that's what we're striving for, and that's why we're here tonight, to try to help us prepare for that land where we'll never grow old. I cannot imagine that, can you folks? I don't think that we, with our finite minds, can really appreciate a place like that. But I'm looking forward to it, aren't you? And that's where we want to go. Appreciate you being here tonight. Good to see Tommy Crosswhite, my wife, here tonight. I told him a minute ago that I don't guess a service has been conducted here for the last several weeks that his name was not mentioned, not only in the announcements, but also in our prayers. And Tommy, we are thankful that you are doing so well. You look like you could get out and plow a farm or something, you know, slowly. All right. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 is a verse that we're all familiar with. We hear it so many times. I'm not going to dwell on that particular verse per se tonight, but just use it sort of as a takeoff point in our study this evening. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, where Peter says, "Be sober, be vigilant." Why, Peter? Because your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. And dear people, you know, and I know, I'm just reminding us that the same roaring lion, the devil, that Peter talks about back in the first century, somewhere around 63, 64 AD, roughly some 30 years after the church had its beginning, is the same roaring lion and the same devil that we face today. And if he has changed, he's even stronger today than he was then, because there are a lot more people today that he's working on today than he was then. Am I right about that, folks? And so we need to be careful. So tonight, I want to share with you a few thoughts, the fact that we are, and I'm talking about we, Christian people, the church, we are under a lot of pressure today. Now, I don't think this is news to any of us. We know that we are under a lot of pressure today, pressure from the world, pressure from Satan, pressure from people all around us who are trying to get us to change our way of living. And folks, there are a lot of people, and I mentioned this in another lesson a week or two ago, that there are so many people in our world today, and a lot of them in places of authority, who are actually trying to do what Paul did. I think that was the lesson maybe I talked about, Paul, that are trying to destroy the church. They're trying to destroy Christianity. They're trying to destroy the fact that there is a God that we worship. That means that we are under a lot of pressure today. A lot of pressure. And I want to talk about that just a little bit tonight. 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11 is really the verse that I want to go to take off on tonight for our study. Under the fact that we today are, every one of us, are under a lot of pressure. Maybe you've been under pressure at work sometime. Maybe you've been under pressure at school. You know, school's about to start. And I have all three of my children in the school system. Some of you are in the school system. You could not give me your job. Now, the only way you could give it to them is that to be the only way I could survive. Because I'd probably have to take me about a half a dozen baseball bats in the room with me. Now, can anybody relate to that? You know? But kids, the way kids are today, I don't envy people. I would be under a lot of pressure having to deal with what I have to. I hear my kids talking about it, you know. And so I get it from them a lot of time. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11, 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11, notice what Paul said. Lest Satan should get an advantage off us, and I'm not going into the background of the context for time's sake. Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. I want to take the last phrase in that verse tonight and sort of build a lesson around it. We are not ignorant of Satan's devices. And that's Paul writing. And as I mentioned in the lesson this morning about enduring affliction, Paul was a great man to talk about that. And Paul was indeed a great man. Of course, writing by inspiration, we understand that. But he was a great man to talk about the devices of Satan. Because I guess that the Apostle Paul, when you begin to read all of his writings and all of his letters and the history, secular history about the Apostle Paul, that Paul faced just about every type of device of Satan that Satan had in his arsenal. I mean, he faced it all, and Paul knew about that. And he's writing to these people at Corinth, which is the same to you and me, that we cannot afford to be ignorant of Satan's devices, because, folks, if we are and we become ignorant and we let our guard down, Satan will indeed infiltrate our lives. And hasn't he done that to so many people today? And so let's look at just two or three, and I have a few things here, and I just want to look at two or three areas where the Christian is under pressure today. Number one, I'm just going to make these as simple as I can. That's all I preach anyway. We are under pressure to conform to this world in which we live. Paul said in Romans chapter 12 and verse number 2, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed, be ye changed. Don't be conformed to the world. Why? John writes in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. The world passeth away. And then he goes on to talk about God forever. And so, why are we not to love the world? Now, is he talking about the universe? Is he talking about the moon, the stars, the sun, the air that we breathe? He's not talking about that. When John says, love not the world, by inspiration, he's talking about the world, the way the world works, the activities of the world, the ways of the world. Don't love those things to the point that we begin to follow those things and pattern our lives after those things. That's pressure, is it not? Everybody wants to fit in. You know, I was sitting down this afternoon and up at the hospital with Faye, and I was just sort of turning these thoughts over in my mind the best I could. By the way, that is not a very comfortable chair in that room to study from, let me tell you right now. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I was trying to turn some of these thoughts, and I thought, you know, actually what Paul is really saying, I think, in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, and in Paul and John in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15, is when he says, love not the world, be not conformed to this world. Try not to pattern your life after the world to the point that you fit in with the world to the point of denying Christ and who Christ is and turn your back upon God and the Lord's church. I think you could sum those two verses up that way, don't you? Try not to fit in. You know, we all want to fit in. I like to fit in up to a certain point. I don't want to stand out like a sore thumb, so to speak, but if that's what I have to do to please my God, I will stand out and stick out as a sore thumb, won't you? If that's what it takes. And of course, we know that it probably doesn't come to that in most situations. And I know things have changed. People talk about, Ed, times have changed. I don't deny that. Ed, customs have changed. I don't deny that. There's so many changes that have gone on in our world in my lifetime. And I've lived longer than most of you in this assembly tonight. I know one or two that's older than me. They won't admit it. But they are anyway, Aren't you, Hazel? Okay. I'll answer for that one, I'm sure. But, there are a lot of changes, and customs have changed. Lifestyles have changed. I think about the dress code today and how the dress code has changed so much. And I love you, and I want to go to heaven, but sometime we have to depart, we have to separate ourselves from the world, don't we? Because there is that pressure every day. Well, they won't like you if you don't fit in. You won't fit in with this. You won't fit in with that. And you'll be a standoffish, and you'll be this, that you'll be at. Whatever. You know where I'm going with it. Not just that. Think of the home situations. Look at the children today in our homes. A lot of them do not even know who their parents are. Is it any wonder, folks, that our world is going in the direction that it's going? And what's bad about it, it's just accepted today in our society, is it not? So much of this is accepted in our society without any thought whatsoever. Like same-sex marriage, which is in direct contradiction to God and God's teaching. But it's got to the point, it's just sort of an accepted thing in our world today, in our society today, and therein lies the pressure. Well, you can't say anything about it. You can't speak up against it. What did Paul say? What did Peter say? We ought to obey God rather than man, In Acts 5:29, I believe it is. And so there's that pressure to fit in with the way the world is going. And when Paul said, we are not ignorant of his devices, we need to be careful lest we become ignorant of the devices of Satan and give in to that pressure that is on us every day, wherever we go and whatever we do. Folks, I believe that's what Paul is saying, and I believe that's what Peter is saying in 1 Peter 5 and verse 8, and Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11. But then another area, and I mentioned two or three. Another area that there's pressure on us today is just compromise the truth. And of course, these thoughts ought to go along together. That's the way I've designed them that way. When we begin to give in pressure to the world and we give in to that pressure, the next thing you know, what are we doing? We are compromising the truth. Jesus said in John 8 and verse 32, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. If I want to be free from sin, if I want to be free indeed, free in God's sight, there's one thing that will make me free, and that's the truth. In that great prayer that Jesus preached in John chapter 17, If you want to really read the prayer of Jesus, read John chapter 17. And in verse 17 of that verse, Jesus says, sanctify them through thy word. Thy word is truth. Thy word, God's word, is truth. And we cannot afford to give in and give in to the pressure to begin to compromise the truth. What did Paul say in, look with me, I did not have this in my notes, but it just popped in my mind. Look in Acts chapter 28. Chapter 20 rather, not 28, but in chapter 20 and verse number 28, where he's addressing the elders of Ephesus, you know. And, when he talks about in Acts chapter 20, where he's been to Ephesus and he's talking to those elders, and notice what he says in verse number 27 of that chapter. This verse just sort of popped in my mind. Acts chapter 20, in verse 27, Paul says, for I have not shunned to declare unto you all the counsel of God. I have not dodged anything, Paul says. And when I, as a gospel preacher, or you as a teacher, or by example, or whatever, when you and I begin to compromise with the world and give into that pressure, the next thing you know, we are giving in to compromising the truth and begin to soften in some areas. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 22. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 22. Seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit, one thing, love of the brethren, see that you love one another with a pure heart fervently. You have been cleansed with the truth, and we cannot compromise the truth. When we're talking to our friends and our neighbors, folks, we cannot give in. We cannot compromise the truth. And I'm afraid, you know, I'm not very smart, and I know that, and you know that. But as I read and I talk to different people and preachers and people involved in churches in different places, there are a lot of places that you can go today in the Lord's church, and you can go and you can go and you can go and you can just keep on going, and you will never hear a good gospel sermon telling people what they need to do to become New Testament Christians. And that's sad. What are they doing? They're giving in to the pressure. And they begin to compromise the truth. When the Lord Bible talks about singing, we can't compromise. Well, I know that, an instrument over here, over there, it makes it sound so. I don't deny sometimes it makes it sound good, but is that what God authorizes? So you can't give in to pressure. And we have to stand strong. Another thing I thought of this afternoon, and I actually jotted it down somewhere right here. I don't know where I jotted it down. I don't even see it in maybe I jotted it down on a piece of paper at the hospital. It's probably still laying up there somewhere. Okay? But I thought of a song that we sang here last week or two. I shall not be moved. That's been on my mind the whole week, Al. I shall not be moved. And like I say, I thought of that this afternoon, and folks, that's what we're talking about. We cannot give in to the pressure and compromise with the world, because when we do that, we begin to compromise the truth, don't we? And then that will lead us to the third point that I want to make tonight. When I conform to the world, and then I compromise the truth, you know what that makes me? That makes me a man pleaser. We've become men pleasers. You see how that goes? Just one step right after another. I conform to the world. And then I begin to compromise the truth. I don't speak the truth. And then we become men pleasers, pleasing men rather than God. I like the way Paul put it over in Galatians chapter 1, and writing to the Galatian brethren and talking about, that they had, verse number 6, how soon they had been moved away from the gospel. And Paul is so concerned about the fact that they've been, they haven't been Christians all that long, and now then they're moved away. They're giving in. Why? They're beginning to conform to the ways of the world. They're beginning to compromise the truth. And now then look what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10. He says, "For do I now persuade men?" Is that my purpose in life? Or he says, or God? Do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? You see, Paul's asking a question. Some of them did not like the way Paul was preaching, obviously. And he goes on to say, "For if I yet please men, I should not be the servant of Christ." Paul said, I can't please my Lord and please mankind at the same time. And Paul couldn't, folks, and you can't and I can't, can we? It just can't be done. And so we're not to be men pleasers. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 3. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 3, Paul says, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine." But he goes, "They behave to themselves teachers having itching ears, and shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables." Paul said there's going to come a time that people will not listen to the truth. You think that time has come already? That time has long since come, hasn't it? People will not listen to the truth. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear what God says. They're more interested in what man says, and therefore they become men pleasers. Where did it begin? It began back trying to conform to the world, which led to their compromising the truth. And now then they're not trying to please God. All they're trying to do is fit in, that word, a term I used a moment ago, and try to be men pleasers. I just want men to say good things about me. Well, I like people to say good things about me too. Don't you? I like people to say good things about me. Let me know when you are so I can record it, okay? Okay. And you do. We all like that. But I'd rather God to say good things about me than mankind, hadn't you, folks? I'd rather God say good things about me. And really, that's what Paul is trying to get across to these Galatian brethren here in Galatians chapter 1. He said, I'm not a man pleaser. I don't please men. That's not my goal. That's not my purpose. That's not my aim. That's not what I'm in the business of going and preaching for, to please mankind. I'm trying to please one person. As a matter of fact, it was just yesterday. I'm just throwing this in. I was talking to an individual. We had a funeral I was on yesterday, and we just got started talking about the scriptures and talking about church, and I made the comment to that person. I said, I'm just trying to please one person in life, and that's God. And I'm in it. That person really agreed, nodded his head this way, but he was not teaching the truth. And so this is what really Paul is saying. We cannot afford to become men pleasers, but there's that pressure, you see, to do so. And so there's that everyday pressure. What Paul say? We're not ignorant of Satan's devices. Don't be ignorant of this, because that's one of his devices. You begin to conform to the ways of the world. Adjust your life to fit in with the world. That's what Paul is saying don't do. Because when you do that, the next step will be you're beginning to compromise with error. And then when we begin to compromise with error, then we are in the area of pleasing mankind and not God. So I'll just share those three thoughts with you tonight, and based upon the statement Paul said, be not ignorant of his devices, and that's some of the devices of Satan to try to get us to yield to the pressure that's over us, every single day that we, doesn't make any difference where we are, there's that pressure to conform, to compromise, and to please mankind. I hope you're not doing that tonight, and you know, we're in the God-pleasing business, aren't we? And the only way that we can ever get to that place that we sang about a few moments ago, that land where we'll never die, never. The only way we can get there is to heed the advice of God in not conforming, compromising, or pleasing. And just sort of lock those three words in your mind and try not to do that. If you're here tonight and you are subject to the Lord's invitation, you've never been baptized into Christ, as the Bible clearly teaches. Even Jesus himself said, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. These are the words of Jesus. It was Jesus who said, except ye repent, ye shall all likewise perish. Jesus said those words. And prior to that, he said, if you confess me before men, or whosoever confesses me before men, him will I also confess before my Father which is in heaven. That's what the eunuch did in Acts chapter 8 when Philip baptized him. And so if you need to do that tonight, or if you've done that, if you've drifted away from God, the Lord, the church, what an opportunity you have to come back tonight, repent, be restored, get involved in the work of the church. Try to help build it up, striving to go to heaven and take others with you. If you need to respond,